This film is about dementia, but it's not the usual story. It's about the way that dementia is framed and a radical new agenda that's needed to move things forward at the scale and at the pace that's now required. It's about an industry that's built up around the funds and the policies that have sustained dementia over the last 10 years or so. And that is what we're challenging. A new voice, a new set of issues, a new agenda.
That's why we're here in Belfast. We want to meet some of the key people we've been working with over the last 10 years. We want to ask questions about what's working and what change still needs to happen. And we're going to focus on 5 areas: politics, rights, faith, the arts and education. Governments all over Europe struggle with this. The issue's too big and too complicated, and of course funds are limited. But perhaps it suits politicians to think of it like that, because who's going to say to people there isn't enough money to deal with this and you're on your own? Let's have a look at the politics. There's no question that dementia is a policy priority all over the UK, but in Northern Ireland there have been some problems, as we're going to hear from Niall McCracken, the journalist.
One of the most disappointing stories that we ever did in this area was that recently we found that some of that money that was being set aside for dementia, there was an underspend of over £1 million. Now, if you talk to anybody who works in any area of dementia care or a carer of somebody who would love more respite time, or people who come out would say, how under God could you not spend £1 million of that? I don't think Northern Ireland is prepared. Carers are taking on a lot of the burden here at the moment, and you have to wonder, is that going to give at some stage? So I think these are serious problems that journalism certainly has a role to play in maybe highlighting some of those issues, shedding a light on issues like that are uncomfortable for people. But I think sometimes government needs to be put under pressure and that to sort of come back with clarity on those things. When people go into their final years, there is going to be a burden on whoever the surviving family members are.
Dementia has had a lot of money thrown at it, enough to make real change happen. But this change has just not happened. The main players, the trusts, public health agencies, the charities, took the money and just went on doing more of the same, and remained almost completely closed as an industry, unconnected to the real world of today. This was never going to work.
We were told in the last 2 years that the voice of dementia has grown in Northern Ireland, that Dementia NI has provided a welcome counterbalance to the traditional voluntary and advocacy organisations like Age NI and Alzheimer's Society NI. But are the rights of people in Northern Ireland any clearer now than they were before awareness-raising programmes? Has any real progress been made? There can be some confusion around the meaning of rights and dementia. How would you describe the rights of people with dementia?
It does fall within the scope of the human rights definition of disability. It is possible for the levels of service provision to reduce. The rights in question are not absolute. In periods of recession, for example, it is possible for the level of service provision to fall back. But the question is, are the service providers able to justify that on good human rights grounds? So regression is recognised as a possibility, but it should in essence be a last resort, and it should be a defensible decision.
The title of this film is A Radical Agenda. What sort of thing would you like to see on a radical agenda?
Well, one thing from our perspective which would benefit dementia and generally health and social care provision and debates is to give meaningful domestic effect to the treaties that are already signed up to. If you take literally the content, for example, of the Disability Rights Convention and were to transpose it meaningfully into the debate and give it life in terms of the debate for dementia, for example, I think the outcomes and the way people understand that discussion would be radically changed. Human rights aren't pick and mix. You know, you don't pick the ones that you like and the ones that you don't. There's no way you're going to get to the heart of a rights-based issue without ensuring that the people who are at the core of that are actually central to the discussion and that their voice is being heard. And public resource and ways and means have to be found to ensure that that is the case.
So what we heard about human rights was really interesting for me because there was a lot of emphasis on legislation that's coming through but it hasn't been implemented yet. And I also found myself wondering, for the man in the street or the woman in the care home, what does that kind of legislation mean for them? When you're in the power of another person, do you immediately think, I'm going to assert my human rights? That's something we have to think about empowering people and letting them know what their rights are. But do people always think about what we're going to do 20 or 30 years from now when our children are going to have to be looking after us? That's something that has been engaging me throughout these conversations. So, Evelyn, what do you see as the priorities around dementia?
I think for us, the biggest priority will be a specialism in social care around dementia, because the experience for most older people who talk to us about it is that their social care workers are not very experienced in dealing directly with people with dementia, and it's very much a lottery.
And do you want to tell me about some of the successes that you feel have happened as a result of the Commission's work?
So at any one time we would have maybe 200 live cases here of individual older people who have come to us for help, and a proportion of that would be about living with dementia and trying to navigate very complex systems. And it's very, very hard if you already have a loss of capacity or an inability to express yourself to have any success in dealing with a complaint with a public authority.
And so does that really mean that people are on their own in planning financially for the future?
It means that people fall into a couple of different categories. Those who already have money will be able to plan for and seek and find the services that they need. Choice is not good in Northern Ireland. And if you are in a lower economic class, really you're very reliant on the provision from the health trusts. We have concerns around that, in that it's already under huge financial pressure and the means test is already very strict. So your needs have to be at the substantial or critical level before the trust will take on social care for you. But, you know, dementia doesn't appear to be a special case in that either, you know, so many older people will need social care and not live with dementia, and those living with dementia will find it harder to seek it and find it. And of course, in Northern Ireland, I think a lot of people are relying on their families and carers, their sons and daughters, to access this kind of care. We think it's going to be very difficult for people who are on their own.
Do you think it's possible that the dementia bandwagon has moved on?
I'm not sure about a bandwagon as such, but I think that there has been a big investment in dementia in Northern Ireland over the last 10 years, and we're waiting to see the post-project evaluation of that and where that has really touched the ground and been embedded.
I have to be honest, I was really struck at how short-term a lot of the things she was talking about seemed to me. It was all about almost the next 6 months rather than what needed to happen over the next 10 or 15 years. And I was a bit disappointed with that, to be honest. I think the Commissioner really should be focusing on big issues which are about major change in the way that services should be provided, but also about the way people think about dementia and old age. That didn't seem to feature too much in our conversation, but I do know that that's something that the Commissioner does spend a lot of time on.
So now we're at St Malachy Church in Belfast. This is a downtown church which sees all sorts of people, and the priest there has already done work on how to help people who have mental health problems and their families. We've been working with him and with other churches in Belfast on how you can support people with dementia. So now we're going to talk to him about how effective that programme has been, but especially what we have to do next in order to make sure we keep disrupting the thinking and stop being complacent about what we've already done. Father Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the work that has been going on in dementia here in Northern Ireland?
I think one of the things it did, well, you know, you described it there as disruption. Well, it did disrupt our ways of thinking. It shook us up a bit and started us thinking about, is there more we can actually do? These resources are ideal for opening up the conversation. The statutory and voluntary sector, as we know, they can do some of it, but we can do things as well. even though people may appear to not be engaging or unable to engage, especially in the latter stages of dementia, that person is still that person. Even if they don't recognize you and so on, that person is still the person they always were, even though their mental capacities and so on are no longer what they used to be. So I think it's about addressing attitudes around that. And I think it's picked up very well in this resource, where an attitude is expressed that, you know, the relative appeared to die 2 or 3 years ago when they stopped calling me by my name, which I think is very sad, you know. And I think that attitude needs to be reflected on a little. It's very understandable, of course. There is a growing awareness within our own church about the need to provide greater care and services for this particular group of vulnerable adults. So when we talk about vulnerable adults, we are very conscious that people with dementia and related issues are included in that group. And that as a church community, we have a shared responsibility to do what we can for the individual as well as supporting their family.
What I think would be important is to come up with a template of what makes a church welcoming for those with dementia and those who are supporting those with dementia. That we do tailor-make services, that we do put the emphasis in music because we know it's a difference. We do know that familiar words are important. So a welcoming church for those with dementia, I think that's where we should be heading and to make a difference in those lives.
One view about disruption is it should make a real difference, and that's what we've been trying to do here in Northern Ireland. So it was reassuring to hear from Father McGinnity that we've been able to shake things up a bit, but in a way that really helped improve the practical experience of people with dementia. And the practical resource that's been created was something that seems to be being used here, and we hope it will be used now much more widely right across faith communities, where the same issues are being grappled with by faith communities up and down the country.
So, Sue, thank you for coming to speak to us. Can you talk to me about the link with the project, the Dementia Project, and the residential weekend that we had?
Like most people, I thought dementia was really about memory loss. When you talked about functions of the brain which were challenged by dementia and the whole problems with spatial navigation and language and recognition of objects and things, it was a shocking thing that I learnt. The shock being my own total ignorance. Someone in my close family, many years with dementia, and I couldn't how come I didn't know that, you know? So that was really my starting point for the work I went on to make. I spent the residential weekend set me on a course of making work. Through that I got funding from the Arts Council, which meant I could be really quite ambitious with the work. Because it's site specific, it's very important that the work is seen in the place where it was made, because the two are so intertwined. I really wanted people to be able to get into the building, and that was going to be a difficulty, but thankfully the Dementia Service Development Trust came in with some funding which allowed me to be able to open the building to the public for this specific event, which is on Culture Night.
The work we did in education was what gave us the greatest hope for the future. The enthusiasm of the teacher, the openness of the boys, and the way in which they're able to relate to people with dementia without any kind of prejudice and with an interest in emphasising the human rights of those people. Ethna, can you tell us a bit about the project with the boys in the school?
The boys, I think, were very impressed with the facilities that exist. They were very aware that there was very much an emphasis on encouraging those living with dementia to retain their independence. I remember a gentleman saying about how he goes to the shop every day, and the boys were like, "What? You allow him to go to the shop? Surely he'll not be able to find his way back." And the man was he found this very entertaining, that the boys you know, at 16, 17 were questioning his independence in terms of being able to go to the local shop and buy his paper. We had one boy in year 13. Obviously, once the boys get to sixth form, very often there comes a stage when they're looking for some part-time employment. And Tommy Lee had applied for a job in a care home, and you know, he's a very caring, compassionate young man, and he was successful in his application and he's really enjoying it. He said to me that he really wants a job that is rewarding, that it's not just to do for some money, that he actually gets something back from the employment.
Do you see a connection between educating people about human rights and educating people about the needs of people affected by dementia?
It's about making people realise their responsibility, and that with rights come responsibilities, and we can talk about treating people with dignity, treating people fairly, and making sure that people have access to adequate healthcare. All of those sorts of things are very important, but we actually need to see actions, you know, and deeds. And so it's important then for the boys to actually see how they can actually live that out and what they can actually do and what contribution they can make to society.
What's so striking about community-based schools like this one in Ashfield is the strong links that it's able to forge and maintain with local communities. And this means that any work that's done with pupils reaches far further than something that's done from scratch somewhere else. Working with children is really important when it comes to issues like rights, because they take a different take on it. Where the commissioner is looking at rights as a theoretical idea, here the young people are really looking at it in terms of practical actions and deeds. What are the implications? What are the consequences? What do we need to do as young people if we believe in human rights? And it's really interesting to see that coming through so strongly in the way that education is now moving forward, and the implications of that for dementia can only be positive. So what have we found out as we've gone around Belfast over the last few days? Well, on one level, there's quite a lot of hope and good things to build on, particularly when we're talking about real people and communities. But there's also a sense that there's a consensus, and perhaps a kind of false consensus, about the sort of things it's legitimate to ask and it's legitimate to talk about. That's got to stop. What we really need now, from all that we've heard, is something which is asking the deep questions and pursuing them until the answers are there. It's great that the questions are coming from the journalists now, but there's something missing here. There's something about the big institutions that need somehow to embrace this more. So what needs to happen is for us to take back the whole agenda of dementia from this industry that's letting people down on a day-to-day basis. Real people who need answers now and in the future. And that's what we're going to do through our newer project called The New Old. More of that online.